I'm going to just give everyone a minute to connect to audio before we get started. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual interactive panel discussion brought to you by the ACHE of Georgia. My name is Sandra McGarry, and I will be serving as your ACHE technical host for today. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items to help you navigate the program in our virtual environment. For the purposes of noise control, your lines will be muted for the duration of the session. The chat function will be available to you throughout the entire event, and we absolutely encourage you to use it to help us keep this session as interactive as possible. So please say hello, introduce yourself, ask plenty of questions. We're excited to hear from everyone today. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing in ACHE's Learning Management System in approximately 2 business days. Today's session is worth 1.5 hours of ACHE virtual interactive credit. To earn this credit, you do need to be logged in for the entire 90 minutes of the event. All attendees who meet this requirement will have their 1.5 virtual interactive education credit applied within 2 weeks from today's event. We do encourage you to complete the evaluation. I will be putting the link in the chat box before we close out. And so to begin today's session, let me turn it over to John Paul Kroom. He is the president of Wellstar North Fulton Hospital, as well as the ACHE of Georgia chapter.
Great. Thank you very much, Sandra. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for being here. It's my honor to welcome you to today's ACHE of Georgia virtual interactive meeting. Thank you to ACHE again for allowing us to use its learning environment system so that we can provide you with these virtual interactive credits. Today we have a packed agenda, so let me take a few minutes to discuss some important chapter announcements, and then we'll move on to our program, implementing strategic plans for successful operations. And I'd like to start our meeting by recognizing our sponsors and expressing our gratitude to our corporate partners. First, our platinum sponsors are Atrium Health Navicent, Grady Health, Moss Adams, and Wellstar Health System. Our gold sponsors are Act Talent, Grant Thornton, Healthcare Program Advisors, and Piedmont Healthcare. Also Northeast Georgia Health Systems and Visia Technologies. Our silver sponsors are DT Spade, Georgia Nurses Association, KCA Firm, Metro Atlanta Ambulance Service, SSR Inc., and Vivleo Health. Our upcoming meetings are displayed here on your screen, but the highlights include our next Chapter Leadership Series webinar is next Thursday, July 18th. We have guest speaker Alistair Erskine, who is Chief Information and Digital Officer at Emory Healthcare and VP of Digital Health at Emory University. And then on August 1st, we have another virtual interactive session, and the topic is entitled Strategically Mapping Your Career Development. And be sure to join us in person on August 22nd for our Summit North in Jasper, Georgia. It will feature an all-day, full day of educational programs and a networking event the night prior. It was a great event last year, very well attended. So we encourage everyone who is able to come join us to please do so. Visit the events page at www.acheofgeorgia.org for details and registration for all of these events. To encourage members to take the Board of Governors exam, our fellow advancement committee is offering an online archive of last fall's prep class for $50, and please look at details on our homepage. This fall, ACHE of Georgia is offering 3 $2,500 academic scholarships to students pursuing healthcare career-focused graduate degrees. You can apply for those, and please do so before September 3rd on our website. Stay connected with ACHE of Georgia by following our social media pages, or again, visit our website for more information. We also like to invite you to get involved by serving on one of our ACHE of Georgia committees. Contact ACHE of Georgia for more information. Today's program offers 1.5 hours of ACHE virtual interactive credit, which Sandra has mentioned. Our topic today is implementing strategic plans for successful operation. And as you can see, we have an outstanding panel, and it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator. Morgan Jones is the Vice President of Strategic Planning and Business Development for Duke University Health System, a $5 billion preeminent healthcare system based out of North Carolina. She is responsible for leading clinical enterprise strategic planning, strategic intelligence, project management, business development, and consumer insights. She serves on the Academy's Chief Strategic Officer Forum, as president with the Southeast Society for Healthcare Strategy and Market Development, and on the boards of the Carol Emmett Foundation and Duke's Medicare Advantage Insurance product. Now, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the meeting over to Morgan.
Thank you so much, John Paul. So I'm really excited for today's session, really thinking about strategic plans and how we ensure successful operations. So a lot of that's going to be led through our panelists. I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we're going to get into the conversation. Before we do, a quick housekeeping again. If someone has a question, please do put it into the chat. You can also raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask the question directly. We want this to be as engaging as possible. We also are going to be wrapping up at about 1:20 or so. So if you do have a great question, please don't hold it to the end. We really, again, want to hear from everybody today. We're really looking forward to the session. So to introduce our phenomenal panelists, I'm going to start with Linda Barrett. So Linda Barrett is Chief of Governance and Vice President of Strategic Planning for Emory Healthcare. She's Associate Vice President for Strategic Planning for Woodruff Health Sciences Center. She has over 30 years of experiences in the healthcare industry, joining the Strategic Planning Office of Woodruff Health Sciences Center of Emory University in 2008, but has worked in strategic planning for 25 years. Linda was appointed Chief of Governance for Emory Healthcare in 2023, and in this role, she oversees the effective coordination of Emory Healthcare, Board of Directors, and the Woodruff Health Sciences community of Emory University. She received her MBA from Washington University of St. Louis and her BS from Finance and Florida State University. Next, we're going to go to Kavanaugh Chandler, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Coastal Community Health. He oversees 16 clinical sites in 7 counties across 2 states, with services ranging from primary care, behavioral health, pharmacy, school-based programs, as well as civic programs. He's been working in the healthcare sector, specifically federally qualified health centers, since 2018, where he transforms culture from words to something that is truly tangible. He believes in fairness and accountability, leading by kindness, making a commitment to excellence defined by efficiency and effectiveness that leads to true outcomes. And then we have Eric Dalton. Eric is the Senior Vice President, Hospital Operations of Tanner Health System. And as a Senior Vice President, he oversees the daily operations of Tanner Health System's acute care campuses. He is responsible for these departments, campuses, support services, clinical engineering, EVS, lab, nutritional services, respiratory, pharmacy, and security. He most recently served as Vice President of Clinical Program Development and Administrator for Tanner Medical Center. Prior to Tanner, he was the service line administrator for Chesapeake Regional Medical Center in Chesapeake, Virginia, where he had responsibility for developing their initial service line structure. He has also served as Administrative Director of Orthopedics for Bon Secours, which is a 3-hospital health system. He holds a bachelor's degree in Health Sciences Administration from James Madison and a master's degree in Health Administration from the Virginia Commonwealth University. So again, a phenomenal round of panelists that we have today that we're really going to be looking forward to learning from. And again, if someone does have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and be able to ask directly. Otherwise, be happy to review your question in the chat. So as we get started, we're also going to make this interactive. Again, we want to be hearing from all of you, and we know that you all are here either to learn something or to contribute. We have something that we can be contributing to this conversation. We will be doing an interactive poll throughout the session, so please do respond. We're actually going to start our first one now, in part just to make sure that our technology is working. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first question, and then again, we'll get into hearing from each of our panelists. So the first question you should be seeing now on your screen. So do you have a strategic plan in your organization? Yes, no, sort of. I'm going to give it about 3 more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to see if I ended, if you all can see the responses. Okay, so yes, I'm getting nods. Okay, so 82% of you have a strategic plan, 4% do not, and 14% are sort of. So again, this is where we're really excited to hear from our panelists to understand how are they able to implement successfully a strategic plan into operations. So I'm going to start with Linda. So Linda, if you can, please tell us about your involvement in the strategic planning process.
Great, thanks, Morgan. Thanks for having me here today. So talk a little bit about what Emory Healthcare does and who we involved in the strategic planning process. We use a cascading approach to our strategic planning to see how we can involve more and more people at various level of engagement. So we typically have a smaller executive team get together and draft the plan, but then we start getting feedback on it. So we start with groups, whether it is a system group that we have that has focus on strategy and operations. That group includes leaders of our hospitals, leaders of our physician division, leaders with our corporate services or our service lines. So it really does cover the spectrum of the organization. We use that for feedback, make adjustments. Then we start cascading it out from there. Larger senior leader group, that's about 150 people, again, getting input, and then start cascading from there to all leaders in the organization. Of course, with my governance role, I have to mention that we do engage our board. That is important, who ultimately approves the plan. And then I have to also mention on engagement that we have to work very closely, of course, between strategic planning and our finance to ensure that we are having a plan that is integrated with our financial projections.
Thanks, Linda. And maybe let's just back up for a minute as well. When you think about a strategic plan, can you kind of just clarify, what does that mean to you? How do you kind of define strategic planning?
Well, that's a good question because I think it really does vary quite a bit, and it varies of what we're talking about an organization-wide one or a service line plan or an operating unit plan. But if I'm thinking about Emory Healthcare, we do have what I'll call a strategic framework that's associated with long-term goals. And then cascading to what our higher level strategies are. That leads to the development of an annual operating plan every year. We also have our long-term financial projections that are aligned with those goals and the strategies.
Great, thank you.
And I'll also mention that since we are part of Emory University as the AMC, we also had to make sure that we are aligned with the Woodruff Health Science Center, which is the broader entity that includes the schools of medicine, School of Nursing, School of Public Health, along with some others like Winship Cancer Institute. So it gets a little complex.
Great, thank you so much for those comments. Dr. Chandler, I might ask you for a few comments from your perspective as well, both how do you think about strategic planning? I love part of your bio that you talk about the importance of culture. So would also kind of be curious to hear how you think about culture as part of your strategic planning process.
Thank you, Morgan. So as a federally qualified health center, the very essence of who we are is to care for our community. So from the perspective of looking at our strategic plan, we have to have a clear understanding of what our mission and purpose is. Across the country for federally qualified health centers, that's improving access to care. So anyone wants to get to the position in which you want to establish your strategic plan, it's what's your mission, what's your purpose? And then from there, we involve our board of directors, myself, and our immediate leadership, and then also our what we would call our frontline team members, as well as certain grassroots community members. So again, understanding your mission and your purpose first and foremost, I think will help you define some of the various parties that need to be involved which will help safeguard you from potential hiccups in the near future as you try to execute those particular strategic plan agendas.
Thank you. And I love the comment in the chat. Yes, we all know culture eats strategy for lunch. We probably have all experienced that in some form or fashion in our organization.
Right.
Dr. Chandler, any comments on that
Yeah,
perspective?
I think that's so true. You know, I was stressing just yesterday on a call that, you know, it's easy to speak of culture and speak of culture, but you really have to live it. And you have to have each party within your program understand first and foremost why they're there. And I think the reason why culture does eat your strategies because there's a misunderstanding. There's not an alignment of how the strategic plan impacts each individual person within your organization. And ultimately, the communities in which you serve. So I absolutely agree. Culture is extremely important, but it should be more than just simple words.
Thank you. So true. And Eric, from your perspective, how do you think about strategic planning and how have you been able to kind of lead it effectively in operations throughout your organization, as well as the many organizations that you've had in your background?
Yeah, thank you. I think you're going to see a theme outlined from the first two very well-run organizations, but really it starts with mission. As a not-for-profit healthcare system, our goal is to expand access and improve the health of the community. So as you look at strategic planning, that really drives where our long-term goals are. And the plan itself is the vision and mission, or excuse me, the vision and the roadmap to get there. So that's kind of really, as we think about strategic planning, and then how are we going to continue to keep Tanner Health System viable into the future? And how we approach that, from what Linda said, it really is truly a cascading approach. It starts with the senior management team and the board establishing high-level framework, but then engaging at all levels of the organization to ensure that we're all pulling in that same direction. A lot of times we even find sort of initiatives or value from the frontline staff that we weren't even thinking from a senior team. So the cascading approach, and then that really helps on the implementation side, that we're all aligned from the beginning of the plan.
Thank you. And so I think we've heard from each of the organizations kind of how they think about strategic planning. We heard a little bit from Linda in terms of who's involved in their strategic planning process and why to do a strategic plan. But now let's ask you. So when you think about kind of why would you do a strategic plan, again, want to go back to the poll questions and be able to kind of say, okay, from your perspective, let's see. Nope, not that one. From your perspective, why do a strategic plan in your organization? And so again, want to hear from you. We've heard from our panelists why they think it's important to do a strategic plan. From your perspective, why does your organization do a strategic plan? Panelists, get ready. You're probably going to get some questions based upon these topics here. And I'll do a 3-second countdown. And I'm ending the poll. Okay, so why are you doing a strategic plan at your organization? So a pretty good mix here between growth and proactive. Some just say it's kind of required and then a bit reactionary. So in terms of growth and proactive, I'd love to kind of hear again from your perspective. Erica, might start with you here. Again, you talked about kind of the importance of setting the mission throughout the organization, making sure kind of everybody's moving in the same direction. How do you think about growth versus proactive? And maybe how does that show up in your organization?
Yeah, I think first hitting on the proactive side of things, there's so many opportunities within healthcare to take advantage of, and then so if you don't have a plan, you're just going to react to what is the flavor of the day, and you could be very pulled off of your mission. So the strategic plan really allows you to set that proactive vision that's aligned with your mission and values. And I think as you look at growth, there are always opportunities to invest resources, and those resources are finite. So how do you allocate those across the system? And having a well-established, well-thought-out plan that's bought in by the entire organization allows those resources to be allocated in a place that's going to ensure growth and potential future viability. It also allows for buy-in as you look at why did we invest in this part? What was this growth opportunity? You have a long track record of the rationale and the reason behind that laid out in the strategic plan.
And Eric, at your organization, how do you communicate that? How or who are you communicating your strategic plan with?
Yeah, I think it starts at the board. So we kind of go through our planning cycle and it's revealed to the board at a retreat. Then we take all of our leaders off site. It's revealed there as well. And then ultimately it is cascaded down to the entire organization to ensure that the frontline staff understand where our priorities are, where we're going in the future, and then how we're going to get there. And it's achieved through operational rounding, leaders going through the departments, and always being visible and kind of driving that strategic framework.
Wonderful. Linda, from your perspective, again, I'd love to hear kind of what you think about growth versus proactive, as well as you kind of shared with us before about who's involved in the strategic planning process, but again, the importance of communicating it such that the strategic plan is not a paperweight, but kind of, as Eric is saying, it's something that is lived and breathed throughout the organization.
Yeah, so I will say very similar to what Eric has talked about. It is incredibly important to not be reacting to everything that happens. We can be whipsawed around if we do that. So being able to look forward, look at the trends, look at what's going on in the market, and be able to intentionally plan for that is incredibly important. Really resonate with when Eric talks about the allocation. We do have finite resources. And I think we could all agree that it's incredibly hard to prioritize. I think for healthcare in particular, we have a hard time with that, but we only have so much we can invest in. So looking for those best opportunities is key in being able to make a plan over the next 3 to 5 years to say where we're going to invest those resources, but also be able to make adjustments as we go through every year. Talking about communication, I will just go back to a cascading approach. Incredibly important to cascade throughout the organization. Again, starting with the board, our board meeting, our fiscal year starts in September, so we're getting ready for the board meeting in August. That will approve the plan. From that, we kind of similar to what Eric talked about, we do have retreats with what I call the larger senior leader group to really start rolling out the plan, and then allow them to go to their groups, because I think that is incredibly effective when you have the local leaders going to say, this is what the system plan is, this is what it means for your hospital or your physician group, your clinic, or your functional area, and then be able to cascade it to what this means for your day-to-day work.
Thanks, Linda. And Dr. Chandler, from your perspective as federally qualified health centers leading multiple service lines, would love to hear how you're able to communicate it across the service lines. And again, how you're able to kind of stay true if your perspective is different from others in terms of growth versus proactive.
Yeah, I think regardless of your line of work that you're doing, it is true and true. I think where it all starts back is what's your model? What's your mission? What's your intention? If you're a for-profit, if your business is structured in which it's a growth process, or you're more focused on being community-based, that's going to gear the direction you're going, whether you're focused on a proactive approach or a growth approach. Personally, for us, we like the proactive approach because the proactive approach has allowed us to kind of define the different regions that we're interested in going to, and which leads to indirectly to our growth as well. So as for instance, our organization started to grow out of Brunswick, Georgia, and headed on up along the coast towards Pooler and also Savannah, it was a question of where's the community, what's happening. So from a proactive perspective, we saw a significant economic boost in our communities, in particular, like with the Hyundai plant coming and what that meant for jobs within the next year, 2, 3, 4 years. So strategically, how do we position ourselves in a place to be a worthwhile institution and program that would be best suited for, again, who would be best utilizing our services? So I do kind of see that taking the proactive approach allows you to also focus on the growth aspect as well, to establish a clear plan and then execute appropriately with your different individuals within your organization.
Great points. And I think just to follow on, and we're going to ask the audience in a moment, But just given how quickly the industry is changing, we have so many kind of headwinds and tailwinds coming at us right now with a very evolving, very dynamic market and force. So, Dr. Chandler, from your perspective, as that occurs and as we kind of think about what we can control in our organization and what we can't control, either through policy or regulatory changes, how are you kind of being able to weather the storm, if you will, and stay true to those mission and goals throughout your organization?
Well, it's kind of when you mentioned the inlight of the bio in reference to what leads your organization. We lead first and foremost by kindness. That drives everything we do, right? So internally, we're establishing that mission where we're treating each other appropriately, and then externally taking care of our clients, I think keeps us ready and available to deal with some of the stressors. I think as it relates to the political changes or policies and different market changes, we understand in our organization, our main word is pivot. You have to be prepared to pivot at any given time. And your strategic plan should allow you some flexibility in doing that and being able to pivot if this policy changes, that policy change. But at the same time, going back to the start of this conversation, your mission and your purpose hasn't changed. And I think that will allow you to develop the credibility within the communities you work with and the parties that you'll be utilizing your services to see that you're true and you're consistent and genuine. So yes, I think the key word, if you take anything out of this process, from my perspective, is to be prepared to pivot at all times.
Eric, yes, go ahead. I see you have some thoughts on that one.
No, I just think that's a very good point. I think what Dr. Kavanaugh hit on, it's really knowing who yourself are as an organization, what you're here to do, and having that drive. So you can have a strategic plan that's on paper, but if there are external forces or things that don't make that valid, how do you then move in a way to take advantage of it, one, but then still fits in that core mission and values. And that's really the key, because we're all going to be, I think, one of the susceptible things outside of our control. You can't be tied too much to the singular plan itself, but it is truly how does that get you to your destination and be able to move within that process. We like to sort of take a tight, loose, tight approach where we agree on a very high level, tight goals that we're going to hold ourselves accountable. We have the leeway to achieve those, but then keep ourselves accountable each day to manage those expectations.
Really appreciate that and agree. We have to be able to stay flexible and pivot while staying true to who and what we are right now as organizations. So Eric, I'm going to come back to you, and then I'm also going to ask Linda this question. We kind of have a theme coming through in the chat. Eric, you talked about the importance of the board and kind of a board retreat and being able to share the strategic plan and communicate it. How are you getting feedback from the front lines and or incorporating modifications in terms of operation or day-to-day challenges that they might have in your strategic planning approach and process?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be knowing a little bit about Emory's approach too. I think it's going to be very similar to Linda's response, but we take the high-level organizational goals that are tied to the strategic plan, cascade them down to the facility level, the departmental level, and then there are a visual board in each of the department that's established by pillars that outline those strategic goals, and then how that aligns to the daily work of those individual departments. So they can see what their individual department goal, how that then their impact impacts the overall organizational efficiency. And through that, we're able to see are high-level organizational initiatives achievable? Are they realistic? Where have we missed the mark as it relates to the frontline staff? And it really helps that bi-directional communication. And then there is an expectation of the leaders throughout the organization that they are in the departments interacting with frontline staff at those strategic viz boards and working through what our overall strategic plan was, and then how do we operationalize that?
Very similar, Eric. Absolutely. It is really showing that connection between the system level goals all the way down to whether it's a hospital, the physician group, down to a unit, down to an individual frontline employee, to say, how do you connect to the organization and make sure that we're all on the same page and understanding what their actions, what they do every day will impact the organization. And we will find out if we set unrealistic goals, sometimes very quickly, sometimes it may take a little bit longer, what that impact is. And we do need to make adjustments to that.
Great. So the next question that we're going to ask for our audience, but we're also going to come back again to our panelists, is the time frame for your strategic plan. So how frequent do you do it, and kind of what's the length of time that you're planning for? I know traditionally strategic plans have kind of thought about kind of a 5-10 year plus horizon. Given COVID, given what I'm hearing from you in terms of the importance of pivoting, really excited to hear from our audience how often they're doing a strategic plan. So here is launching the question now. So how often is your strategic planning process? And again, is it something that you're doing annually? Are you thinking about every 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and 10 years can be 10 years plus? And I'll give it another 5 seconds. And panelists, when you're responding to this question, would also love to hear if this has changed for you. If this is something that perhaps it used to be one time horizon and now it's something different. We'd love to hear from you on that as well. So 3, 2, 1. So slight majority are saying annual, 3 years and then 5 years. A little surprising to me, nobody said 10 years, which makes me as a strategist very happy. So I'm very happy to see nobody's thinking about a 10-year horizon. But again, so I'm going to stop sharing now. And again, Linda, I might come to you first, just in terms of how often are you doing a strategic planning process, and is that something that has changed for you in recent years or not?
Okay, so I want to start by echoing some things that Dr. Chandler and Eric mentioned. We do not, our core purpose, our mission, our vision does not change frequently. I mean, that is cornerstone of who we are. That's our true north. What we do monitor and look at is to make sure our goals are appropriate and make adjustments on that. We do make adjustments on our strategies, when we need to pivot. We started, I would say before COVID, we were going on a more 5-year time frame of making adjustments to the plan. And I think we all know that COVID just threw that out the window. And now we really are looking at a more frequent basis for our strategic plan. So we're looking at longer term goals. It's more on a 3 to 4 year basis.
Thank you. And Dr. Chandler, would love to hear from your perspective again, same question.
Some great points made there. I was surprised to see that strategic plans were taken based on an annual basis that much. And the reason why I say that is Linda made a great point. There needs to be a clear definition and differentiation between your goals and your strategic plan. Your strategic plan, again, is your North Star. And for us, our strategic plan is 1,095 days. And by that, I mean, it's 3 years. And then by that, I mean, you have to be adjusting almost on a daily basis to your strategic plan. Your North Star is your North Star, but there needs to be clear understanding of what your goals are and what your strategic plans are, because your goals will often change, sometimes daily. Sometimes, it's every couple months and so forth, but you must have your North Star. And it kind of goes back again to what Eric said about being tight, loose, tight. Your strategic plan is what it is, but you also have to have very clear goals that are understandable at various tiers of your organization. So definitely, I think a minimum of 3 years is ideal, with giving yourself the flexibility to pivot accordingly.
And maybe a quick follow on to that before we come to you, Eric, and I'll add this question on for you as well, Eric. How are you measuring yourself to make sure you're moving in the right direction? If it's something that perhaps you're needing to pivot on, or maybe even adjusting daily, how are you measuring just progress as well as maybe outcome?
Yeah, so progress and outcome is going to vary significantly. And that's why clear communication is important. In your strategic goal and your plan, it could be something as simple as clients having a clean, healthy space that they come into with excellent customer service, right? So from the very bottom, quote unquote, of your organization, we actually take a I don't know how you term it, but a bottom-up approach. It's important for us, what is the cleanliness of our clinics, and are we communicating to our janitor why the clean environment impacts the health of the individuals we're serving, as opposed to just focusing maybe on the physicians and so forth and the number of patients they're seeing, et cetera. So I really think it's about very clear and open communication. And the way we kind of gauge the level of success is through those kind of surveys and things that we may ask particular clients and or the individuals within our organization itself. Ask your front desk staff, do you find it to be much easier for you to now register a patient, gather their insurance, et cetera? So I think you're able to kind of tease that through to the different departments and the different groups with team members.
And is that something you're also holding your leaders accountable for?
Absolutely. Leadership, I hold them accountable. We meet regularly, we meet weekly, and then obviously we have different meetings on a monthly basis to kind of look at the larger picture. But absolutely each person at that level has to be part of the culture and has to be there to ensure that those broader items are being accomplished in a more daily tangible manner. So again, the common statement about taking small bites of the elephant, right? We're ultimately acknowledging the larger project, but at each level, the leadership team has to ensure they're communicating it appropriately. What those goals are. I think I'll leave it with this. I'll say one of the biggest things you will discover in a lot of organizations, especially as you get larger, is the mission and the ultimate goal of what you're trying to accomplish this particular year or 3 years is not communicated appropriately, right? So for the leadership groups, regardless of the tier they fall in, they have to understand their place in ensuring that each person at each particular level understands their significance and importance of us accomplishing that mission.
Great response. Thank you. Really inspiring. Eric, from your perspective, again, kind of what's the timeline that you're looking for? Are you measuring, moving the needle in the right direction, and who or how are you holding folks accountable? And I can repeat any of that if helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that we too have kind of shortened our strength planning process. We historically work 5, I think now is 3, really the area of focus. But each year we are revisiting that framework and just ensuring that we're still kind of in the right direction, not going through the entire process, but making sure we're still aligned with what we said we're going to go at that long-term goal. How do we measure where we're going? It is those annual goals that are strongly tied to the strategic plan, and then they're cascaded to individual department, and that then that kind of leads into how do we keep accountable. At the frontline staff, they're incentivized by their departmental goals. That's then tied to their leader goal. That's tied to the facility all the way up to the strategic planning process. So it's all one big alignment each year, and walking away the first of the fiscal year, everybody understands what's expected of them, and we're progressing through those annual goals. So really the annual goals are the ability to measure how are we going forward, and then it's the ability to hold the organization accountable as well.
And Megan, may I say one of the other things that we have to also as leaders determine what drives individuals, right? And what are their goals? And like we do a lot of incentives as well, as Eric mentioned, but there are some in the organization, they're not driven by the incentive, right? So connecting them again to what brought them to your organization. For some, it is for a good pay. For others, it's the mission and otherwise. So I think understanding your clear mission and those particular goals go a long way.
Thank you. And I'm anticipating this is probably a challenge for many. So it's easy sometimes to hear panelists talk about how we develop a strategic plan, how we cascade it, who's involved, how we modify it, snap a finger and it all works great, right? It's all perfect. But we are going to ask a question for a poll here, again, just from the audience. From your perspective, who knows your strategic plan across your organization? And again, I'm sure there's always opportunities for us to be improving both our approach as well as communication. So across your organization, who knows your strategic goals? I'll give it another 5 seconds. Okay. So I'm a little surprised by this one as well. 55%, all employees across the organization. Look at the smiles across our panelists. They are so excited by that as well. So I think that's tremendous. I think that's phenomenal. It means we're doing something right. I know this has historically been a real challenge for strategic planning. And so again, to think about this is something that not just the leaders know, but something again that all employees across the organization know. And so Dr. Chandler, I'm going to ask you to comment on this one a little bit more. Again, when you think about the importance of culture and how people know on a day-to-day basis what they're doing as part of the strategic plan, you mentioned the janitor. Is that something that leaders are going and supporting? Is that something that maybe has changed now in this hybrid or virtual environment that we're working with? How is it something that you're making sure that people are clear as to what they're doing is really day-to-day supporting the strategic plan, or again, needs to be modified? And again, how has it changed maybe in this post-COVID era?
Oh man, it's so, well, first, I was really surprised by the response again that all employees are aware. I'll tell you, for us, it really is the board, the executive committee, and leadership. And then let me kind of tease that through. They understand the bolts of it because it takes, it's a 3-year labor intensive. Again, you have to understand your audience and the organization and what makes sense to some. What ties us together, that connective tissue, is just a shared understanding of the mission. But then we try to really dissect that mission to the different levels. So we had different pods of understanding. The challenges with really pushing that through coming out of the pandemic is understanding the people you're hiring and the trauma that people have experienced emotionally, physically, and otherwise, mentally, that the pandemic has had on them. So the years of perhaps just saying, hey, this is our goal and we need you to meet it, is very different now. You have to understand that you have to engage with employees that require a little more hand holding, a little more encouragement and things of that nature, and incentives. I've sat with other groups and other CEOs in spaces, and they say, well, this is the goal and they should just do it, right? It's very different now. I think a lot of our employees are brand new because many have left the field because they're exhausted from the pandemic. So then how do you kind of get people encouraged, inspired to be a part of this again? It requires a little more time and energy. And like I said, a little more compassion in the process. And being compassionate doesn't necessarily mean that you're not being accountable. I think you're just understanding the challenges that these individuals may be facing in this new environment. And then when you are able to hold them accountable at that point, it's received very differently. At least that's been our experience.
Eric, I know you spoke about kind of the pillars and that all units and unit leaders are kind of part of that approach and process. Anything that you would add to Dr. Chandler's remarks in terms of making sure it's communicated? How has it changed in this post-COVID environment and hybrid workforce?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we found is that our leaders weren't prepared to really bring that down to the frontline staff and show and articulate the system direction to what it meant to their frontline staff. So we had developed a strategy deployment playbook and have a routinized process where each year we take through the entire organization goal and have resources that help the managers step that down into what impacts their staff on a daily basis. And we found that there are different pockets of the organization that respond differently to the goals. They historically couldn't see how coming to the work each day and cleaning a room would help infection control or hospital-acquired conditions. So we had to really visually articulate that down to the staff and empower and educate our leaders on how to do that as well. So we added a lot of tools. We've actually added positions around strategy deployment and performance excellence to ensure that we're able to all pull in that same direction. And historically, what we could just assume as an engaged workforce would understand what we're trying to say really is not there today. I think we're seeing that we need to focus in and lean in on people and put engagement at the highest, because that's really going to get us to our strategy. And we lost a little bit of that through the post-pandemic.
Thank you. Linda, from your perspective, again, would love to hear similarly, how are you able to kind of use tools or help others throughout the organization ensure that they're understanding what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, is supporting the strategic plan? And then any comments you had, also saw that you smiled and the results from the poll.
So what the approach we like to use is what should be communicated broadly, and keep that simple, really keep that around the core purpose, the highest level goals of why we are here, why we are doing, why are we doing what we were doing, setting for our goals. And then go in again to say, how does that impact your unit? And then clearly understanding how does that again cascade to the front line. So I'll give an example of patient satisfaction. If we set our goal of patient satisfaction, we happen to select likelihood to recommend for the high level goal for inpatient. It is cascading that to say, what does that mean for a hospital and where do they have the biggest areas of impact? Is it nurse communication? Is it cleanliness? What is those high impact areas? And that's where it can really be impactful at the individual department level to say, if I work on this, if I work on scripting, if I work on certain areas of, again, talking about environmental services, we know that that's what I can do personally to make an impact that cascades back up to the organization.
Love that, Linda. And again, this could be somewhat of a provocative question, but perhaps it's not today, just given some of the comments that we're hearing. Linda, when you think about the role of strategic planning and who's kind of responsible for strategy, who do you think about across the organization? I'd love to kind of hear each panelist's perspective again. Who's responsible for kind of creating, setting, and driving the strategy of an organization?
So I'm going to start by saying that even though my title is Vice President of Strategic Planning, I do not feel like I am responsible for creating the strategy. I think it is broader. I can help facilitate it, but it is the responsibility of I feel like starting with the leadership team to actually define the strategic plan. I could go into my office and close my door and develop it, and it will not be appropriate for the organization, and it will not be accepted. So I feel like it's everyone's responsibility.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be guided and sort of shepherded through the senior team and the board, but it really has to be the entire leadership team that's engaged in that process. And that really ensures that we're all pulling in the same direction. So really starts with the executive team and the board kind of shaping the direction, but it is everyone's responsibility to bring it together.
And so, Dr. Chandler, I'm going to come to you next, but Eric, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. So I'm sure you're different than Duke, and everybody's always rowing in the same direction. You never have people with differing or dissenting opinions or views. So how do you handle that at your organization when perhaps you're not all initially rowing at the same direction, and or how do you either get consensus or gain clarity in terms of how you're going to be able to move forward?
Unfortunately, we are not unique and do have that same situation. It really comes down to have we communicated and cascaded and really shown the why. And that's anytime that we see that there's misalignment within priorities or strategy deployment, it's the failure of the team to show that individual operation unit of why they're connected to the overall strategy. So we're very deliberate each year as we look at our goal setting and how that ties back, and then making sure that we can go forward and say, so your day-to-day work is X, and that's how it helps us achieve this. And when we have seen, as I said, when we have seen incongruence is where we've not been a really good job of doing that. And that's kind of what led us to that more structured approach of annual goal setting, cascading, developing the strategy deployment playbook to ensure that we can ensure that communication and alignment is there.
Thank you. And Dr. Chandler, so again, whose role is strategic planning in your organization? And do you ever have dissents or incongruence? And if so, how do you build clarity and consensus to be able to move forward?
I think all parties hit on the head. It's really the responsibility of leadership. In particular for us, our board of directors, 51% of our board of directors are actual patients. So ideally, they're supposed to speak on behalf of the community. But ultimately, I think then that responsibility rests on my shoulders as the CEO to ensure that I'm communicating it appropriately to the different leadership team. And as a result, how each member of the leadership team is able to understand their role in communicating that to their parties. So communication is extremely important. As it relates to consensus, I really feel we should never truly have a full consensus, because in essence, I'm not looking for anyone to simply nod their heads and say yes to us, is, to ask questions and inquire why, because I think that leads to us improving our organizations in different ways. And the way we kind of allow for that free space is we want everyone to be heard. And so there are situations in which, just like all has been mentioned with the organizational structure, where we sit, we talk, we hear your concerns, so we can answer those questions appropriately, so that the message the rest of the leadership goes out and says is true and consistent, before it becomes really misaligned, and creates additional issues there. But consensus is not always achievable, and I actually welcome when people feel different and have questions. That tells me I haven't done a good enough job in communicating what our true intentions of the strategic plan and our mission is.
Awesome. Love to hear that as well. Again, strategic planning can be something that can be dictated or provided as a top-down approach, or again, can really be something that is discussed, and all leaders across the organization, as well as staff, team members, all have input and can help develop. So thank you for that comment. I'm going to move to our next polling question, and it's similar. It's really thinking about, where does strategy sit within your organization? And so again, I'm going to open this one up. So who does strategy report to in your organization or your company? So Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, or Chief Strategy Officer. I probably should have had an other as well, but. This one's filling up very quickly, so I'm going to give it another 5 seconds. 2 and 1. CEO. Words to the CEO. So as CEO, Dr. Chandler, I might ask you to provide a few comments in terms of, you started to already kind of comment on this a little bit, but where does it report in your organization? You talked about the role that you have in kind of helping to develop it as well as lead it, but where does it report in your organization? And then why do you think it's critical that it does report at such a high level?
Yeah, I think CEO is spot on. Like I said, you have a board of directors who are kind of discussing when we talk about being proactive or growth, right? So your board of directors are made up of a number of individuals looking at the larger landscape of things and why this organization needs to go in X direction. As a CEO, they bring you in to kind of see if you can help assist with that vision, but also be the one to execute that particular strategy amongst the rest of your organization. So I think the buck stops with the CEO, because I have to ensure that it's communicated appropriately to the CFO, COO, and others what our intentions are, and then how their particular areas are going to impact the mission. So it's definitely, in that respect, I believe, the responsibility of the CEO to communicate appropriately. When it's bad, good, or in between, we have to accept that accordingly. So I think the buck stops there.
And I'm going to open this up if Linda or Eric want to add any additional comments rather than calling on either of you. Does anybody want to add any additional comments in terms of where it sits within your organization or the importance? Linda, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I'll add. Yeah, so we do have a chief strategy officer, but I'm with Dr. Chandler. I mean, ultimately, it is our CEO's responsibility, and I can tell you that we all work very closely together, because Dr. Lee does feel like that he is responsible. He is the one who is going to the board, ultimately, to talk about what our plan is and are we effective? Are we actually executing it?
All right. Any final comments, Eric?
It's the similar theme. I think that it truly is the tone setting of the chief executive officer. So it's the same here.
Great. Okay, so just a reminder to our audience, we are going to be opening up for you to ask questions at 1:10. So please do be preparing the questions that you either want to ask directly to our panelists. You can come off mute and ask those directly at 110, or again, you can put them here in the chat. I am trying to monitor the chat as well. Okay, so let's continue to move on. So again, I think we've all been in a place where perhaps we're all moving along a common path, we're all rowing in a common direction, and something happens, something changes. Could be politics, could be capital, could be COVID. So how do you kind of get your organization together and be able to successfully navigate through pretty significant changes that, again, are outside of our control? And how do you do so in a way that continues to inspire and engage the organization? I think oftentimes as leaders, it can be easy for us to just also put our head down and say, wow, this is a really tough one. We're not sure how to move forward, or we're not sure how to continue to engage and cite and make our organization come together as a team. So who wants to take this one? When have you had a time that's been challenging to implement a strategic plan for whatever the reason? Dr. Chamberlain, I don't know if that's just,
Yeah,
you want to
I,
take this
I don't know how that came up, but
It was pretty cool.
yeah. I will tell you the importance of understanding, having your team around you, and that while I said, yes, it falls on the CEO, I think, again, having a shared mission and, again, letting those folks close to you, because it can get rather exhausting. It can be overwhelming. So creating a healthy environment in which you and your team also can find the balance to have that work-life balance is extremely important. But yes, trust me, I think on a daily basis, sometimes it can seem like, man, everything is going completely left. So your North Star, as was mentioned, has to remain the same, and you have to just remain confident in that.
And I think some of the things that we've seen specifically for federally health qualified centers is just the importance of funding and how lack of funding can really be challenging at times. So I know it's a little bit of the elephant in the room for you, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. How does that impact your ability to be successful in implementing your strategic plan? And how have you thought of maybe different or creative ways to be able to move forward?
Good question. It is funding is extremely important. We see and serve some of the most vulnerable individuals within our communities. And obviously we work very closely with our health systems for a number of things, whether it's through charity care and others. But, often across the country, we have not seen our funding increase at the federal or really any funds at the state level for years now, even through the pandemic, even with seeing the increase in patients. For instance, when I took on 3 years ago, we saw maybe 5 or so thousand patients. In this past 2 years, this year alone, we've seen 10,000 patients within the last 5 months. So, with our growth, there is a need for financial stability. But the way we get creative, and I think our organization, while we've been very different and we've seen such a growth in the last 2 years, is because we think outside the box. We think about partnerships with our hospital. At our local hospital here, we've done a number of things together to expand pediatric care, to expand primary care services, things of that nature. We work with our local governments to maybe do different contractual work to diversify our funding. So while what I always start all my meetings with, both my team as well as to the community, is let's start by just simply acknowledging that we're all in this because we care about our communities and the health of our community, right? That is the quote unquote given. But the reality of it is healthcare is a business. And for us, we have to think about it in a way in which we manage our business appropriately so those that are most in need can have access to that particular care. And by that, we've looked at different business opportunities. Like we service our local jail here, and we've been able to save our share of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which has then led to, their ability to be out on the street and protecting our communities. So we've played our part in that respect, right? But at the same time, it's revenue that we didn't initially have in our strategic plan or in our budget that allows us to offset other aspects of our operational goals. So I think you're going to have to really think outside of the norm financially moving forward. And I think the pandemic really forced a lot of us to be flexible in that respect.
Thank you. I love that response. It really also speaks to our role, not just as a healthcare provider, but our role in the community and how we work throughout the community. So really appreciate that. Linda, I'm going to jump to you, particularly with your additional role as in governance, kind of thinking about how does that play in terms of strategic planning, and how do politics, either within your organization or outside of the organization, really enhance or deter from your ability to be effective with your strategic plan?
So yes, politics do create a increased level of complexity, and I would say within like Emory structure, it is complex, as I mentioned in the beginning. You know, because you do have the university with the focus on you know, we have that tripartite mission, the focus on clinical care plus research and training. So that makes an environment that is very special. It does wonderful things, but you do have to navigate the complexities of that. Keeping the board engaged and educated is incredibly important. Understand the why and understand the impact of all the changes. So keeping up with, this is what's happening nationally. This is what the impact is on Emory is incredibly important. This is what's happening and making changes throughout the state. And again, bringing it back to why is this important for Emory? And so they can really understand that is important. And quite frankly, just doing education on what Healthcare 101 is. Understanding the economics of healthcare, especially if we're moving into more you know, population management and value-based care, that changes the economics of healthcare. So continuing that education is just key.
Thank you. And Eric, I'm sure politics also show up in your role as well, again, internally and externally. Can you speak a little bit in terms of how you're able to be effective in that space? And again, how you're able to continue to think about how those things, again, that we don't necessarily have control over, how we're able to be effective in either navigating through them or influencing.
Yeah, I think first it comes down to with the politics, again, back to what is our core mission and value and what are we here to do, and ensure that each decision we go forward is tied back to that. That way, anything that's happening externally, we feel comfortable that we're following our true north. I think as we look at roadblocks or things that are outside of our control and how we react to it. One is truly understanding what the issue is, acknowledging it, and then having a clear understanding of what that implication is to our health system. Things that happen at a national level, local, state level may have a different impact from an Emory perspective than it does for a Tanner Health, just because of size and scope. And what could that be an opportunity or advantage for us, and then being able to articulate that going forward. So I think a lot of times we just, as you said before, kind of put our head down and say, okay, we have to take it and that's what's going to happen. But if we truly understand the why and then how it impacts us, and be able to react that way, and then be able to communicate that through the organization. I think a lot of times the biggest things that disengages the workforce and kind of dilutes the value of the strategic plan is if we don't acknowledge that there are external forces or things outside of our control that are happening, and saying, okay, this is how this changes our view, and then articulate that going forward. So really being able to have that vision of what's happening and how it impacts us.
If I could just add one more thing, just Eric said kind of spur something, you know, just a recent example, what happened with Change Health, with the incident. You know, I think getting in front of it, especially with the board, especially with all the leaders, as quickly as possible. A lot of it was out of our control of what happened, but being able to, again, educate and let them know what's happening, what the impact is, what are we doing as quickly as possible was extremely helpful to navigate that.
And Linda, maybe to that point, maybe you, as well as Dr. Chandler, could speak to the importance of just having some of those people at your side along the way, so you're not waiting for a critical event or sentinel event or issue to come forward, but how do you really bring them into your team along the way, such that they're also celebrating your successes and your wins, as well as when challenges occur?
Yes, constant communication, not only during the formal meetings, but interim. I am sending communications for Dr. Lee, our CEO, you know, on a constant basis to say, this is what's happening. This is what's happening nationally. And again, what Eric was mentioning, and this is why it's important to Emory. This is why you need to know about it, or just these are updates that are happening. So, and I know there's a lot of meetings with our CEO, our CFO, you know, continually keeping them in touch.
Great. I know we have about 5 minutes until we're going to hear from our audience members, but Dr. Chandler, any additional perspective from you in terms of how are you engaging, keeping your community, your politicians kind of side by side along the way? So you're not just communicating when there's a problem or a challenge.
Yeah, I think transparency is key. As Linda was mentioning to your board, like if you've got challenges, they're going to come. But if you're communicating that to your leadership group and to your board, you're being very transparent, you're being very consistent. So, they're not surprised and they're actually helping maybe think through ways of which you can improve things. For the point that Eric made, once you know what your focal point is, what your why is, you get less caught up in the political aspect of things, regardless of which way an individual may swing. When you know your why, I found that our political allies have showed up at every time because ultimately it affects their constituents. So I think staying very true to who you are and understanding your why. As it relates to, again, going back to your strategic plan, one thing I think is so important that I've said to my team and we say on a regular basis, we can have all the fluff of the strategic plan and everything else that's going on. It starts with your 5 W's, and I always take it back to that grade level, like when I was in school, the why, who, what, where, when, and why. And if you can't walk up to any of your particular employees and they can answer that, then that's a particular concern. So again, I think just understanding your why and staying very transparent with everything you're doing.
Great, thank you. So I know we've spoken a lot about kind of how are we defining a strategic plan? How often should we be doing a strategic plan? What are the components of a strategic plan? How are you communicating as well as measuring success of the strategic plan? So I'm going to open up for our last question, last poll for the audience. What are the responsibilities of strategic planning? And again, would love to hear from our panelists as well. So this is an open-ended one. Can everybody see this? Cannot see it. Okay. It looks different for me right now. Let's see. I unfortunately am not. Can you see it now?
No, still not up. Oh, there it is, Morgan.
Okay. This one looks different for me. So anyway, this is an open-ended short answer response. So I'm going to give people about a minute to answer this one. But what are the responsibilities of your strategic planning department at your organization? We have about 10 seconds remaining. And count down from 5. So if you have not finished, go ahead and just hit submit. So at least we can see some of the themes. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's see if we can see these. Can you see them? I cannot. Can anybody see them?
No, it just shows 100% answered.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna have to get back to you on that one. Hopefully, Sandra.
Are you able to click view details?
I am not.
Because when I click that, it went to another screen that shows all of the I'm gonna try to put this in the chat for you guys.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna
Mhm.
stop sharing and let's see if we're gonna be able to get those results for us. So again, as we are waiting for those, would love to again hear from any of our panelists. And again, we're getting ready to open up for our audience questions as well. But at Duke, I'll just quickly share strategic planning has strategic planning, business development, project management. We also do all of our certificate of need work for the time being, as long as it remains in North Carolina. and consumer intelligence and insights. It's where we take all of our market data and turn it into actionable recommendations for the organization and develop kind of our tools to assess how are we doing for our strategic plan. So those are kind of the big 4 categories that Duke has in terms of what are the responsibilities under strategic planning. Linda, we've heard from you as well. Anything else you would add in terms of responsibilities for your team at Emory?
I'll just mention that along with facilitating the development of the strategic plan, we are also responsible for monitoring the plan, especially through the balanced scorecard. And we do market assessment, service line planning, and some part of business development in partnership with, of course, with other departments.
Thank you. Sandra, I assume that that's you sharing this one. I'm not, and I still cannot see any details.
It's not, because there's so many responses, I'm putting it in a Word document and I'm just almost done and I'm going to submit it,
Great,
insert
thank
it
you.
into the chat here in a second.
Okay, Dr. Chandler or Eric, any additional comments from you?
Yeah, and I think it's very similar to those 2 organizations, maybe not to the same scale. Really, if you boil it down, so I think they're the shepherds of the input, or excuse me, they're the owners of the input and take data or take and make it intelligible, and then kind of managing the facilitating the process, but very similar to what's been addressed here.
Agreed. Similar.
Okay, great. All right, well, we will wait for Sandra to be able to share that Word document just to see any, again, similarities or differences. I think for those of us in strategy, it's always interesting to think about the evolution of strategic planning and how kind of it traditionally has been strategic planning, mission, vision for the organization versus consumer intelligence or insights moving forward. And that actually is one of our questions from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and transition into some of those questions as well. So one of the questions is, how are you thinking about consumerism throughout your organization? And how is that playing into your evolving goals and strategy across your organization? So again, consumerism, how is that playing into how are you defining consumerism, and how is that playing into how you're defining your goals for your organization? Anybody want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, that's been a pretty big shift for us, and we've actually have an individual now responsible for consumerism. We're shifting away from patient as you look at the physician-patient hospital relationship really doesn't exist any longer, and how do we ensure that we are addressing those patients as consumers and meeting them where they want to be met, and really it's kind of sprung into a digital front door to other strategies that are pushing outside of what those historical health system patient relationships were before. But that is a very big key driver for us and a mindset shift at all levels of the organization.
Yeah, I will just ditto that. That really has impacted from what is the patient experience to how do they access us? Is it to the digital? Is it, more convenient geographic location? So it definitely drives our strategy.
And go ahead, Dr. Chandler.
I would agree. I think it's a very new concept for community health centers. But I think for plenty of the community health centers that are quote unquote surviving and succeeding understand that that is the approach that they now have to take. But it can be very difficult for us, again, when understanding your mission, it can be very difficult in communicating that to your board members and your community members that this is why you may be taking X, Y, and Z approach. But it is just part of the nature of the environment we now work within.
Great. And there's another question that's similar. I'm going to go ahead and ask this one as well. So this one is, how are you addressing digital transformation in your strategic planning? And are you weaving digital transformation in healthcare into your master plan, or does digital transformation stand on its own? So again, how are you addressing digital transformation? Is it within your strategic plan, or are you addressing it on its own?
I'll just mention, if I look at look at Emory Healthcare's goal areas, we weave our innovation and our digital efforts throughout, because it impacts all our areas. It impacts our people, it impacts our patients and their families, it impacts the community, it impacts our financial. So it's in my mind, you can't really separate it. but there's also a digital roadmap that clearly is focused on these different stakeholder groups and outlines what the roadmap is for the next 5 years. So it's almost both, I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely both for us as well, but it, again, is why it's so important to have a strategic plan. It's how do you roll that out and where is it most appropriate? There are certain markets, if you have multiple spaces, that it really wouldn't make much sense and it would probably be more costly to you. So I think being very focused on which areas is best suited to utilize that, but it's absolutely part of what we're doing moving forward.
Yeah, I'd say the same, definitely both. I think it's as important enough that kind of expanded the topic, like Linda said, to innovation in general, not just on the digital side, but how are we going to do things different, understanding that there are finite resources from a labor pool or other things. So we have now an innovation pillar where we're driving goals and tying to a strategic process that way, but it is aligned with everything that we do from a people process perspective as well.
Great. And I think there could be a whole session just on innovation and how do you think about innovation and strategy. So we could go very far down that. Linda, any additional comments you want to offer before we do move on though?
I'm just going to give a plug for the next webinar. Dr. Alistair Erskine is going to be speaking, and he is over our digital transformation at Emory, and he's really exciting. Yeah, if you join it, you will leave energized and inspired. So that's my commercial, Morgan.
Great. Couldn't have timed that one better. Thank you. And Bruce.
Morgan, so Sandra sent that document. I stripped out the email addresses. I know we don't want to share email addresses. So do you want me to share that on my screen so you can take a look at it?
Sure, that would be great. If you could quickly pull that up.
Okay. All right.
So again, this is the question about the roles and responsibilities of strategic planning and organizations. And we are all continuing to learn Zoom and all the other virtual platforms. So appreciate everybody's grace there.
Sure, give me just a second. I'll put it up here.
And as he is doing that, again, keep the questions coming. I do have 2 more that I have seen come through that I'm going to ask.
Okay.
If you're not able to do it, Bruce, it's okay. I think we could probably do it as a follow-up as well.
Sure, I'll put it up in just a second. You guys go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the other questions that we have. And again, please do keep them coming. Does anybody want to unmute yourself and ask a question directly to our panelists? I'll pause and see if anybody is brave enough to do that as well. Yes, Amanda.
Hi, so this is the question about compensation. If any of your strategic plans incorporate any of the goals and objectives in anybody's compensation plan, whether it's leadership or physician leaders, and does it cascade down perhaps to employees or managers at more closer to the front lines in terms of their performance reviews? Are you weaving any of that in that respect?
Hey, Amanda, I'll start. Yes, we do tie our incentive plans to our organizational goals. And we make sure very intentionally that they are tightly aligned with, again, our balanced scorecard and those targets that we set for the balanced scorecard, because we want to make sure that we're all headed toward the same direction and the same target. And those are cascaded.
Yes, that's the same for us. All incentive goals throughout any level of organization is tied to the annual goals that are tied to the strategic plan.
Yes, we do that as well. But again, I think you make a great point. If you heard both Linda and Eric there mentioned goals, it kind of goes back to what I mentioned about understanding your strategy and then the goals that are tied within that you're going to measure on a regular basis. But having your strategic plan, I will say we discuss it at a large with the leadership group, but the goals and how the incentives are actually distributed, that's really flexible. And we kind of have conversations back and forth with the board as that may be necessary.
Thank you. And it does look like Bruce is sharing his screen. So very quickly skimming it, it looks like there's a lot here in terms of responsibilities of the strategic planning department include a framework for the strategic plan, market intelligence, being able to share or assess market trends, ultimately to drive future direction for the organization. So that is my quick scan of the themes of what this document says. So thank you for sharing that, Bruce, and thank you to all of our audience members who responded and participated. I do have another question. It kind of goes back a little bit to the compensation. How are you assessing ideas throughout your organization, particularly as it relates to capital or other investment tied to the strategic plan? So again, how are you assessing investment or capital for the organization as it ties to the strategic plan? So I think the question is really about when you're making big decisions, are you grading them or evaluating them based upon your strategic plan and goals?
Yes, in every way possible, we are. You know, you may make one move before you make another because it makes more financial sense, or even to be honest, it may make more business sense, or even structuring yourself politically. You know, being in certain spaces may open opportunities in other areas for you. So it is absolutely tied in to everything you do.
Yes, our capital planning process is tied with the annual goal process that's then driven by the strategic plan. It may take different forms each year depending upon what's happening. Like this year, we're in the midst of a major construction project, so that reallocates how funding is going across. But there is that annual capital planning process that's tied to goals and the achievement of the strategic plan.
And I'll add one nuance. Also, our capital process is tied to the annual process. We do have people, project owners submit their cases for their strategic projects. And we have a team that reviews the cases and reviews it against set criteria, including the tie to our strategic plan. So we have to just make sure that we're ensuring that constant connection with the plan.
Great, thank you. Sounds like a lot of similarities across successful organizations and how you're using strategy to be successful in your operations, which again is really the intent and aim of today's discussion. So thank you for sharing. Any other brave souls out there that would like to ask a question directly to our panelists? About 5 minutes remaining.
I'll ask an earlier question. It was way up in the chat about change management. And do you call that out in your strategic plans? Do you incorporate tactics around change management with regard to your plans, or do you leave that in the implementation aspect of your strategy?
We tend to leave that in the implementation, and it's back to that tight, loose, tight approach that really feel that the change management fits into that open area where we set the goals and how you're going to get there. I think one of the things that we found historically is that if we try to sort of have the solution of how we're going to achieve our strategic plan in the planning process, that may not be really tied to the root cause of the success. So how can we then facilitate a process where we're evaluating, all right, this is where we want to go, but how truly are we going to get there and not be tied to that in the plan itself, but it's in the implementation phase.
Anyone have a similar or different approach? Linda?
Very similar. It really is more in the implementation and deployment.
Yep.
Agreed. And just positioning yourself to pivot if necessary.
Thank you. So again, the next question that we have, it goes back to kind of how are you communicating your strategic plan? So there were a handful of us that talked about that our strategic plan was available and communicated publicly. So what are your thoughts about publishing the strategic goals or strategic plan on the organization's website publicly?
We have a document. It's not really the true strategic plan, but it is a sort of one-pager that shows the framework. So it really is kind of follows the mission, and then in the individual pillars, what are our areas of focus, and that's published. But to the level of detail of our entire strategic plan, no, we don't do that.
And I would say for Emory, we have our mission, vision, and values published, but we have not published any of the other details.
Same here. We have not put anything to that level there. And I think if we are thinking about putting something up, but it'll probably be close to what Eric was saying, you know, be a very broad stroke, because I just think you have to be mindful of what you put out there and then what is kind of expected from the community, and not understanding that you may have certain nuances that will cause you to have to adjust. And when people see what's what, they're expecting that to the letter. So I'm mindful of how certain things are communicated.
Great, thank you. And I do think there's a difference when we think about publishing it publicly to our intranet versus sharing it throughout our organization on the intranet. So again, there is a comment here about linking it to our intranet such that the workforce or town halls can be shared specifically around our strategic plan. Love the idea of video recording to be able to, again, disseminate the information to a wider audience who perhaps is not able to participate.
Yeah,
immediately.
I'll just mention, you know, I completely agree with being a lot more transparent on the intranet. And in fact, we have links and data links to our balanced scorecard that's available to any employee, so they can look and see how we are doing on a frequent basis.
Thank you. And last audience question, Craig, you got it.
Thank you, Morgan. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a fantastic panel, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable to hear all of your comments and feedbacks. My question is that I think Dr. Chandler mentioned about mergers, acquisitions, and joint ventures, and did a little research, and they're increasingly and rapidly happening within the healthcare industry. You know, as hospitals and health systems and providers secure partners in order to gain the competencies and the scale needed to succeed in the emerging care delivery and payment environment. And as we talk about the strategy and strategic plans, what are the critical elements and initiatives that must mesh well together when you're considering partnering or with another healthcare organization?
It's a good question. I'll take that one because we've that's kind of been our growth process over the last 3 years. As I mentioned, in the last 2 years, we went from three clinics to now 16 clinics in 2 states. And it has to be very clear, you know, is this where we have a similar mission, whether it's helping our communities, but then we have to see where it's mutually beneficial. You know, it has to be a situation where it's going to be sustainable, because neither party wants to be perceived as one that's walking away from the community or cannot sustain that which we're trying to establish. So it's mutually beneficial. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that each particular venture you're going to get more in a sense, but sometimes it may be a give in this particular area because it helps your partner. But on the other end, it's going to be a win for you. So I think understanding what your true intentions are, being very honest with each other at the leadership level, and then being able to execute that throughout the community in a way that's consistent and true to what the community's needs are. It has to match the need of the community. It cannot seem in our world in healthcare as if you're doing it, you know, for some sort of other agenda.
So thank you so much. Great question, great response. We're coming up on time. Before we do so, I'm going to ask one final question. Each of our panelists, you have 10 to 15 seconds is all to answer this question. And then we're going to turn it back over to John Paul. So as strategists, we are constantly looking forward, right? We're constantly thinking about what's next. What do we need to be doing? What is it you are most excited about when you think about healthcare in the future? Not what keeps you up at night, but what are you most excited about?
I think there's now, I think it goes back to digital transformation, innovation. I think there's now so many different players in the healthcare space that real change is going to be facilitated and catalyst. I think that historically we've done the same thing for years. We've cared for patients. I think we've had a big push in the value perspective. Really hasn't taken to us where we need to go, but I think now there's disruptors everywhere. It may be scary, but it's going to change the way we do things, and it's going to be best for the patients.
Thank you. Dr. Chandler, Linda, 10 seconds. Any additional comments?
I'll
I'm
just say
excited
that,
about-
you know, oh, sorry, Dr. Chandler.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, going off of what Eric said, it is, you know, how we deliver care is changing, and it is changing in the, you know, exciting ways. So keeping up with those changes is going to be a lot of fun.
I'm excited about the ongoing partnerships and just the need for that, for us to just adjust and develop more partnerships that we can execute. And in particular, in the training capacity to bring more providers into our role in some urban spaces.
Wonderful. Thank you all to our phenomenal panelists. John Paul, back to you.
All right. Thank you again, Morgan. Thank you to Morgan Jones and all of our panelists. Thanks to Hugh Jackson, Dr. Philip Atayebi, Gina Tipton, and our programs committee for organizing today's committee. Thank you again to our sponsors. We appreciate all you do to provide leadership for the healthcare industry in Georgia. And special thanks to ACHE for hosting today's program so that we could offer virtual interactive credits. And also, as a reminder, please be sure to complete ACHE's meeting evaluation. Your survey feedback will help us to improve our programs as we continue to add programs on, and also let us know what you enjoyed and what you would like to see. Now, at this time, I will turn the meeting back to Sandra McGarry at ACHE for some closing announcements.
Great. Thank you all so much. On behalf of ACHE, I just want to thank our chapter leaders that planned today's session, our moderator, our panelists, and all of you. We had some really great interactive participation today. As he had just mentioned, please complete the evaluation, which will be open for 1 week. The direct link is in the chat box, and you can also visit, you can also access the evaluation by visiting your My ACHE page and selecting My Online Learning from the helpful links section on the right side of the screen. From there, you will click on Access My Courses and will be directed to our learning management system where you can complete the evaluation. In that same location, you will be able to access the recording of this session within approximately 2 business days. Everyone who attended today's event in its entirety will see their 1.5 hours of virtual interactive education credit posted to their My ACHE account within 2 weeks of this session in the My Education Credit section. This does conclude our session, which is copyrighted in 2024 by the American College of Healthcare Executives, all rights reserved. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Hey, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hey, thanks, Bruce, for taking my question. I think it was mentioned that there was a scholarship that was available, that deadline September 3rd. I went to the Georgia ACHE website and I did not see that scholarship.